Honestly, it's for the best. She's always been so dramatic." The words hung in the air, a thin, sharp icicle aimed directly at my chest. My mother's voice, saccharine sweet, the kind that could curdle milk, delivered the judgment with a casualness that suggested she was discussing the weather. I stood frozen, a mug of lukewarm tea growing cold in my hands, the mundane Sunday morning shattered like delicate glass. My younger sister, Chloe, beamed beside her, her fiancé, Mark, a placid, agreeable presence, all smiles and nods. They were the picture of perfect happiness, the kind of happiness that felt like a deliberate, well-aimed slap to my own fractured reality. My normal, or what passed for it, had always been a tightrope walk over a chasm of unspoken resentments and carefully curated illusions. My parents, pillars of the community in their own minds, were masters of deflection and denial. My childhood trauma, a sprawling, tangled mess of neglect and emotional abuse, was to them an inconvenient personal failing on my part. A phase I needed to get over. An unfortunate episode that was best left buried, its whispers silenced by the roar of their manufactured contentment. Chloe, 5 years my junior, had always been the golden child, the sun around which their universe revolved, her life a string of effortless successes and uncomplicated joy. My own struggles, my therapy sessions, my panic attacks, they were just, much. Too much for their perfectly manicured lawn. The realization that my parents saw my deepest pain as mere drama wasn't new, but hearing it articulated so blithely, in the context of Chloe's imminent engagement celebration, struck a new, chilling chord. It wasn't just dismissal, it was active erasure. My suffering was an embarrassment, a stain on their pristine reputation. And Chloe, my own sister, who had witnessed fragments of it, who had sometimes offered a hesitant, uncertain comfort in the dark, stood there, radiating a manufactured innocence, offering no defense, no challenge. The silence from her was a louder condemnation than my parents' words. It was the quiet acknowledgement that my reality was not welcome in their gilded cage. This wasn't a sudden outburst. This was the culmination of years of silent erosion. I remembered distinct moments, sharp pebbles embedded in the smooth stone of my childhood. Like the time, shortly after I'd finally found the courage to speak about a particularly insidious incident with our uncle, my father had called me into his study. Not for comfort, but for a lecture. He'd sat behind his mahogany desk, a man of considerable authority in our small town, and explained, with paternalistic patience, that some people are just more sensitive than others, darling. You need to learn to toughen up. This is holding you back. Holding me back from what? From being a burden? From shattering the illusion of their perfect family? Then there was the family vacation, a desperate attempt by my mother to reconnect after I'd been hospitalized for an anxiety disorder. We were at a crowded beach resort. I'd been trying to enjoy the sun, the unfamiliar piece of fragile thing. A wave, larger than the others, had knocked me over, the sand and salt stinging my eyes, the disorientation triggering a full-blown panic. I'd scrambled out of the water, gasping, tears streaming down my face. My mother had rushed over, not with concern for my terror, but with a tight-lipped annoyance. "Oh, for heaven's sake," she'd hissed, pulling me away from the water's edge. "Can't you just have one normal experience? Every single family event, you have to make it about you." The look on her face wasn't just impatience, it was disgust. As if my vulnerability was a contagious disease. Chloe had been nearby, building a sandcastle with Mark's younger brother. I remembered seeing her glance over, her brow furrowed for a fleeting second, before returning to her game, as if she hadn't seen her sister dissolving into a heap of raw nerves on the sand. It was then, I think, that the understanding solidified, her comfort was conditional, her loyalty negotiable, dependent on the prevailing familial winds. My parents' disdain for my drama was a deeply ingrained belief, and Chloe, eager to please, to belong to the perfect picture, had learned to echo it. The engagement party was supposed to be a celebration. My parents had rented out a section of a charming, albeit slightly stuffy, country club. White linens, crystal glasses, the soft murmur of polite conversation. I'd gone, wearing a dress I'd painstakingly chosen, a pale blue that I hoped wouldn't draw attention, a silent plea for peace. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and forced bonhomie. My parents, beaming, played the proud hosts, their smiles never faltering. Chloe, radiant in a borrowed diamond necklace, flitted between guests, accepting congratulations with a practiced grace. And then, it happened. It was during the toasts. My ever the orator, raised his champagne glass. He spoke of Chloe's grace, her intelligence, her future with Mark. He spoke of their love, a love that was unburdened by the complexities that can sometimes plague younger generations. The pause that followed was almost imperceptible, but to me, it stretched into an eternity. My gaze, drawn by an invisible force, landed on my mother. Her eyes met mine, and in that instant, the carefully constructed facade crumbled. Her expression wasn't one of shared pride, it was a subtle, almost imperceptible sneer, quickly masked by a practiced smile. Then came the words. My mother, leaning into the microphone, her voice amplified, her eyes sweeping over the room, a self-satisfied glint in them, delivered her own little addition to my father's toast. And Chloe, she continued, her voice dripping with feigned affection, we're just so proud that you've found someone who appreciates your wonderful, uncomplicated nature. You've never been one to dwell on the negative, have you, darling? Always looking on the bright side, which is such a gift, really. Not everyone has that. She gave Chloe a pointed look, a silent imprimatur. The room was filled with the polite clinking of glasses, the soft rustle of expensive fabrics. No one seemed to notice the carefully veiled barb. Except me. The blood drained from my face, leaving my skin feeling paper-thin. My chest tightened, a familiar vice gripping my lungs. Uncomplicated nature. Not everyone has that. It was a direct echo of my father's earlier words, a sharpened, more vicious version. It was the ultimate betrayal, delivered not in anger, but in a chillingly casual, public pronouncement. They weren't just dismissing my trauma, they were actively mocking it, framing it as my personal failing, a grotesque contrast to Chloe's supposed perfection. Chloe, who had just blushed and nodded, accepting the compliment, completely oblivious or willfully ignorant. The silence from her, the lack of any reaction to the thinly veiled insult aimed at her sister, was the loudest statement of all. The weight of it settled on me, a suffocating blanket. That night, I didn't sleep. The words, the looks, the casual cruelty replayed in my mind like a broken record. The lukewarm tea, the polite chatter, the faux smiles, it all felt like a meticulously staged performance, and I was the unwilling prop, the inconvenient truth they were desperate to hide. The feeling of powerlessness, so familiar, threatened to consume me. But this time, something had shifted. It wasn't the shock of betrayal, but the cold, hard clarity of inevitability. I saw the pattern, the generations of denial, the ingrained habit of silencing anything that didn't fit their narrative. And I understood, with a stark, unyielding finality, that I couldn't change them. But I could change my relationship with them. My revenge wouldn't be loud or dramatic. It would be quiet, precise, and devastatingly effective. It would be a surgical removal of their ability to wield their power over me. The next morning, I didn't call or text. I drove to the lawyer's office I'd researched months ago, the one recommended by my therapist's colleague. Mr. Sterling was a man of quiet efficiency, his office smelling faintly of old paper and polished wood. I laid out the situation, not with anger, but with a dispassionate recounting of facts. The family trust, established by my grandmother, was complex, designed to provide for all her grandchildren. My parents, as trustees, had significant discretionary power, but it was contingent on acting in the best interests of all beneficiaries. My grandmother, a shrewd woman, had included a clause, a safeguard, she'd called it, against financial mismanagement or actions detrimental to the well-being of any beneficiary. I presented Mr. Sterling with the documentation, including a detailed, albeit condensed, account of my parents' consistent dismissal and mockery of my mental health struggles, their explicit statements framing my trauma as an inconvenience, and Chloe's complicity in this narrative. I had meticulously gathered evidence over the years, saved voicemails, screenshots of passive-aggressive texts, journals detailing their comments and my emotional responses. It wasn't a plea for sympathy, it was a case for gross negligence and a clear violation of their fiduciary duty. Mr. Sterling listened patiently, his expression unreadable. He explained the process: a formal inquiry, a potential court order to remove them as trustees, and the appointment of an independent administrator. It would be a drawn-out affair, but the evidence, he assured me, was compelling. The execution was the day after the engagement party's official brunch. My parents, still basking in the glow of Chloe's imminent wedding, were at home. I arrived unannounced, my composure a carefully constructed armor. My mother opened the door, her smile faltering slightly at my unexpected appearance. "Oh, Arling, what a surprise," she said, her voice tinged with a subtle unease. "Is everything all right?" "Yes, Mother," I replied, my voice calm and even. I walked past her, into the living room, where my father was reading the paper. They both looked up, a question in their eyes. I didn't engage in small talk. I reached into my handbag and pulled out a thick envelope. It was from Mr. Sterling's firm. I placed it on the coffee table between them. "I've initiated proceedings to have you both removed as trustees of Grandma's trust," I stated, my gaze steady, meeting my father's surprised frown and my mother's dawning horror. "Due to breach of fiduciary duty. Mr. Sterling believes there's sufficient evidence of your actions being detrimental to my well-being as a beneficiary." The silence that descended was absolute. The chirping of the birds outside, the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, all seemed to recede. My mother's face, usually so expressive, went slack. My father, for the first time in my memory, looked genuinely flustered, the newspaper slipping from his grasp. "What are you talking about?" my father finally stammered, his voice uncharacteristically weak. "Detrimental to your well-being? That's absurd." "Is it?" I asked, my gaze cool. "When you publicly mock my struggles? When you frame my trauma as drama and an inconvenience? When you celebrate my sister's uncomplicated nature in contrast to my supposed failings?" I didn't raise my voice. The quiet delivery was more effective than any shouting match. My mother found her voice, a frantic, reedy sound. "This is ridiculous. You can't do this. Chloe will be furious. You're destroying everything." "I'm not destroying anything, Mother," I said, a subtle smile finally gracing my lips. "I'm simply ensuring that Grandma's wishes are honored, and that the inheritance intended to provide security for all her grandchildren is managed responsibly. A responsibility you've proven yourselves incapable of." The precise moment their defeat registered was palpable. It was in the widening of their eyes, the tremor in their hands, the utter collapse of their self-assured arrogance. They had built their lives on control, on manipulation, on the power to dictate reality. And I had just taken their most potent weapon, their financial leverage and their control over my inheritance, away from them, calmly and irrevocably. The fallout was immediate and predictable. My phone buzzed incessantly, a frantic barrage of texts from Chloe, interspersed with messages from aunts and uncles, their digital voices a chorus of outrage and confusion. Chloe's messages escalated from bewildered questions to accusatory demands. "How could you? Mom and Dad are devastated. You've ruined everything for everyone." My parents, stripped of their authority, resorted to their usual tactics, guilt trips and public shaming. I received tearful calls from my mother, laced with veiled threats about disinheritance from other avenues, and my father's stoic pronouncements about my ingratitude and mental instability. Flying monkeys descended in full force. My Aunt Carol, a self-appointed arbiter of family harmony, called, her voice a saccharine blend of concern and judgment. "Honey, your parents are just trying to protect you. This is such a dramatic overreaction. You're really hurting them." I politely ended the call. The social consequences were, for them, perhaps the most crushing. My parents' carefully constructed image of benevolent matriarch and patriarch began to fray as whispers about the trust dispute circulated within their tight-knit social circles. The country club regulars, privy to gossip, started to give them awkward looks. Their influence, once so pervasive, began to wane. My parents, stripped of their trusteeship, faced financial scrutiny they had long avoided. The independent administrator discovered several questionable financial dealings and a significant depletion of funds that couldn't be accounted for. It wasn't a dramatic collapse into poverty, but a slow, humiliating unraveling. Their prestige diminished, their social standing took a hit, and the veneer of their perfect life began to peel away, revealing the desperate financial maneuvering beneath. Chloe, on the other hand, found herself in a precarious position. Her wedding plans were thrown into chaos as the financial implications of her parents' downfall became apparent. Her once supportive fiancé, Mark, began to exhibit a newfound wariness, his gaze shifting from her to her parents with growing concern. Her own access to the trust funds was now subject to strict oversight, a far cry from the assumed entitlement she had always enjoyed. I observed it all from a distance, a quiet observer in the unfolding drama. There were no victory laps, no triumphant pronouncements. The satisfaction wasn't in their suffering, but in the quiet certainty that they could no longer inflict their particular brand of harm. The chasm between us had become an unbridgeable gulf, and I had finally stepped out of its shadow. The emotional justice was in reclaiming my narrative, in refusing to let their denial define my reality. The silence that followed their frantic accusations and Chloe's increasingly desperate pleas was the most profound sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of my own hard-won peace, finally settling in.